Today we have Kristen Cox, who works for the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, and she's going to come speak for a minute, and then her son is going to do her introduction. So, thank you.
So, Riley, it takes a village. My whole family's here. My parents, my oldest son, Tanner, who's at school, and my youngest son, Riley, is kind of interested in speaking. So I did a speaking engagement up in Logan a little bit ago, and he was so great, he wondered if he could do a little thing here. So are you guys cool giving him a couple minutes? A 9-year-old? Yes. With all support and love, right? Okay, Riley, you want to start? He's got a joke, too. Okay, come here. Okay, do you want this? Okay. Hold it, and I'll just hold this. Or you can hold that, too. Okay. Here. You hold that, and I'll hold this, and just stand right there, okay? Stand where they can see you.
Hi, my name is Riley Cox, and today I'm going to talk about 3 keys to life: confidence, creativity, and hard work. Before I get started, does anybody know how you get a University of Utah graduate off your front porch? You pay him for the pizza. Now I'm going to tell you a story that illustrates these 3 topics. When I was in 3rd grade in 2013, I was a student rep at my school. We needed to sell 1,000 lollipops, and there were only 400 students. I had to use my creativity to find ways to make this project exciting for my classmates. I had to use my confidence. I used my confidence to talk to my class and lots of others in my school about the lollipops. It was a lot of hard work to wake up at 6 a.m., get to school early, and go to the cafeteria, get everything set up, and sell all morning. When the sale was over, we sold all 1,000 lollipops. I hope you all don't end up like the Utah student in the joke above. I'm sure you will all be successful, and I hope you can be creative, confident, and hard-working here at BYU. Now I'm going to turn the time back over to my mom.
Wow. That is going to be hard to even go after that. He's a 9-year-old speaker, which is pretty amazing. I also want to acknowledge Dr. Ted Lyon is here. Whoa. So if I fall, you guys, it's on you, right? You got to tell me when I'm about to trip. Dr. Ted Lyon was my teacher when I was at BYU, and I remember being at that point in my life when you're like, how do you be a cool Mormon, right? Like, can you be an intellectually active Mormon? You know, can you be that way? And I saw Dr. Ted Lyon, and he was just a catalyst in my life for the kind of person I wanted to be, and it was so great to see him. I haven't seen him in years, so he's actually here. So he had a huge influence on my life. Good to see you. Yes, and it's good to see you too, in the way I see you. So it's a real honor to be here. I graduated from BYU and loved my experience here. Now my oldest son, Tanner, is here as a freshman, and just reliving it. So I was asked to talk a little bit about my career, what I do, my experiences to get here, and then finally lessons learned. And I think when you hear about what I studied in college, you will come to believe that I'm completely unqualified to do my current job. What I studied and what I do are very different things, and hopefully I can relate that back to are all of you guys poli-sci majors? Is that a fair assumption? No, you're everywhere, all different, all types of careers. Okay. So I'll kind of talk to you about what I did. Does anyone know what the Governor's Office of Management and Budget does? I'm over that office. Don't raise your hands because it will so not work. So you can just speak out if you have. Does anyone know what they do? I didn't know that much either. My current position is I work for the governor, and I run a shop that we do everything from revenue estimates in the state. So we have to look ahead and forecast what the revenue is going to be at the state for both income tax, corporate tax, severance tax, sales tax, beer and alcohol tax. And it's so funny because we're in a state that doesn't like alcohol, but we are addicted to the revenue in the state. So we look at all the revenue projections. So I have a group of economists that does that. I have another group of people then that are our budget. We call them our budget policy analysts. So we look at how, right now we're in the middle of budget season, and we look at all of the needs across the state, from transportation and water infrastructure to higher education, public education, health, all of the agencies, and based off of our revenue and our existing resources, how are we going to fund all these demands and these needs? And then what's right policy, right? You can add the numbers, but what's the right policy about a lot of the legislation that comes out, as well as policy behind funding? And I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then I have a group of operations. And that means people who go into our agencies. We have 24 cabinet members, or cabinet agencies, about 20,000 equivalent FTEs in our state, about 23,000 overall. But they go in and look at agencies, and they look at how they actually perform. What is their systems, actually how they function? What are their performance measures? What's the flow of work? How are they using their time? And when we get into the actual guts of agencies, we start to understand if this is a system that's performing well or not. Does it need more resources, or does it still have a lot of untapped capacity? And we don't want to actually put more money into it until they avail themselves of their untapped capacity. And again, I'll talk about that in a little bit. So we have those three pieces: our budget and revenue folks, our kind of policy team, and then we have our operations team. And they work in concert to help support the governor in making policy and budget decisions across the state. So it's a lot of fun, it's a lot of hard work, and this is our crazy season right now. Anyone in Utah know, did you guys know when our legislative session starts here in Utah?
January.
Starts in January, huh? And we're lucky in Utah because it's short. And I love that it's short. And tell you, California is year-round. And does California have some problems? Yes, and I like to correlate it to the fact that they have a year-round legislature. So they were about 6 weeks, and it's short but very intense, and we actually have to have a constitutionally balanced budget. So our process right now starts that we're building the budget for the governor. We'll go into final decision making at the end of the November. Kind of in November, we get our revenue estimates, and then we know what our money is, predicted money, and that's one big thing, it's an estimate. And then we build our budget around that. We get final blessing from the governor, and then that rolls out in December. And that kind of becomes the blueprint that the legislature will kind of look at as they make their decisions, and we negotiate back and forth and threaten vetoes and back and all that stuff. And then we finally finish up with the legislative process in April, in March. And then we have a period of time, this is just what else we do in my office, we have a period of time where we have to review every single bill that was passed during the legislative session, and we have to recommend to the governor sign or let go into law without signature or veto. And that's another big effort of reviewing all those bills. And any idea of the magnitude of bills we pass in Utah? We're supposed to be a conservative state too, right? A lot, like over 400. You'll have a lot of bills passing through, a lot of bills introduced, a smaller proportion actually pass. A lot of them are technical cleanup bills, and then a few bills that are pretty substantial. And we'll tend to veto a few a year, and depending on our mood, actually. No, depending on the legislature, the makeup, and all the politics that goes behind that. If you can do a veto override, if you think you're going to veto a bill and they're going to override your veto, there's a lot of back and forth on that as well. So there's a lot of decision making that goes into what kind of bills are you going to actually take a stand on and veto, because you lose a lot of political capital if you can't sustain your veto. So that's basically what we do. Now we're a little different in Utah, and then I'll go into my, how I got this job, but we're a little different in Utah because most states, and I worked back in DC for a while, have an Office of Management and Budget. But what's different is we have these operational people. So most people will just make budget decisions, right, for CHIP or healthcare, right? Anyone tracking the whole Medicaid expansion issue going around this country? So they'll look at those numbers and make policy decisions around that. But what we do in addition to that is we do this operational performance review. And that means really understanding the flow of work, because you can't go into a system, from my perspective, into any agency and say if they need more money or not unless you really understand how their current performance is. And if you're a private sector organization, you guys talked about Goldman Sachs, They have a COO, a Chief Operating Officer, that understands the operations in the weeds of that system. If you're a GM and you're building a car, you fully understand the flow of your assembly line. You understand what's called takt time or lead time and the flow of your work and what's happening at each station. Government struggles with that a little bit, or a lot, in really understanding that, have that mindset of a COO to really understand the operation performance. So we've built that into our entire budgeting process because we do not want to invest scarce taxpayer dollars into systems that have untapped capacity. And that includes everything from child welfare to traditional transaction systems that put out business licenses. So it's a lot of work, but we're having fun doing that. So that's kind of what I do. And before I go to experience, any questions on that? Because it's really a fascinating world. Politics on that, the legislative process, what the office does, policy, budget. Any questions?
Kristen, we've already read about a budget surplus 2 or 3 weeks ago. What was it, 800 million or something?
It was 112 million, but and that's a really great question.
How do we know that already is my question.
So this is a really good question, and I didn't really get it till I got in this job. So we have, right now, we're in called fiscal year 15. It never aligns with the calendar year, and it doesn't line up with the federal fiscal year. Our fiscal year in Utah runs from July 1st to June 30th. So the end of June, this last June, we closed out 2014. At the end of closeout, we look at what we expected to collect in revenue and what we actually collected. So we collected 112 million more than we expected. We actually collected like 165, but we have statutory mandates that we have to have a portion of our surplus to the rainy day fund. And that's really a great thing Utah has. We have over $400 million on our rainy day fund. And even during the worst part of the recession, we still had just over $200 million on our rainy day fund. So we tapped into it, but we didn't use it all. And that was the worst recession since the Great Depression, right, in 2008. So we transferred some to the rainy day fund. We had 112 million. But that was for 2014. Now, we're right now developing revenue forecasts for 15 and 16. We believe at the end of this fiscal year, what we estimated last year for this year will have more than we think. We could have anywhere from 70 million to 200 million more in surplus dollars. We do a range. We'll nail that down in a few weeks. So we'll have an additional surplus for 15 to add to 14. So we'll have some surplus money. And that's called one-time money. One-time money is really good for capital investments, right? Infrastructure for technology for schools, or a building, or a piece of technology that really just requires a one-time investment. And then we will project what's called our ongoing revenue, what we can count on every single year for 2016. And we'll do that in November. So we have the surplus for 14. We'll add the surplus for 15 to that and have a total surplus number as we go into the legislative session for this year. And then in November, we'll announce our forecast for 2016. It's a crazy process, and let me tell you this, never believe in economic forecasting. It is an estimate. There's some great books. Anyone read Black Swan, Anti-Fragile? Really different books on forecasting. Harvard Business Review has put out some really interesting podcasts on forecasting. We believe forecasting is helpful. We're actually pretty good in Utah. We're conservative. We tend to have a negative downward bias so that we're very conservative. Some states have, I was talking to the budget director in Maryland, they have a negative, almost, I think he said $100 million deficit because their predictions, estimates were too high. We're very conservative in Utah about our estimates, but they're just that. And we're having a big debate right now around believing that our estimates are crystal balls. They're not, and how we accommodate that in practical terms. Any other questions about budget or policy? What's going on with any policy topic?
Is that solely based on budgeting with your department? And then also, just kind of follow up, about what percent of the time do you think he goes with your suggestion?
All the time. I can't even believe you'd ask that question. 100% of the time he agrees with me. No. So There's a senior team, so there's me, and I'm budget and policy, and then we have a lady named JC. She's the general counsel. The lieutenant governor, obviously, we have a specialist on education bills. So there'll be a team of about 5 or 6 of us, and then if it's like an air quality bill, we'll bring in an environmental lady from our environmental quality team. And we review, there's about 4 or 5 of us that review every bill, and then other folks based on their specialty that will give input. So we'll review every bill, and so I may have a budget and policies thing on it, but our attorney may say there was a bill last year that the governor let go into law without signature because part of it was unconstitutional, and it was a very small technical issue, but the legislature promised to come back this session to fix it, so he didn't veto it. So she'll review for like constitutional issues and things like that. And generally speaking, you know, if it's we're normally pretty much on the same page on the final ones. We may start with a list of like 20 or 30 bills to veto. Sometimes I'd like to veto half of them, but realistically, you know, you may have a list of 20, and then you start drilling down, and by the last week, you may have like, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 left on it, and then you get into pretty good debate, and then we end up at about 2 or 3. And I would say for most of the time, once we really debate it and discuss it, we're pretty much on the same page, because a veto carries weight. I mean, you lose political capital. Again, you've got to know if you can sustain your veto. If you know you're going to burn bridges for something that's stupid. Sometimes there's bills that you let go into law, and you think, it's not perfect, but am I going to have a political fight on my hands on this one, and I'll lose it, compared to really putting all of our political capital into this one that's really problematic. There was a bill we vetoed last year, had to do with, it was in reaction to, remember the whole Attorney General issue? Our Attorney General resigned here in Utah because he was accused of bribery, et cetera. The legislature, in reaction to that, created legislation where they could basically subpoena anyone in front of their committee, and their subpoena power was unlimited. In fact, you know, they could subpoena any of you guys under this legislation to come up and produce your grocery bill records. We had big constitutional issues with that. The people who had passed it were very defensive of the bill, and it was going to be a big fight. So we vetoed it, but knowing that was going to be a huge hurdle for us to not have our veto overridden by them. And we won it. They couldn't override the veto, but it took enormous political capital and work to make that happen. So you have to be somewhat selective on what you go after. Any other questions on that? Okay. So my experience, again, I'm so unqualified for this job. My major, my oldest son laughs at me. Guess what my major was? Just guess.
English. Educational psychology.
Dude, you read my bio, didn't you?
Yes.
You're super prepared. Not anything related to what I do. I really wanted to be a forest ranger, or zoology, actually. I wanted to be like Diane Fossey and study gorillas in the Congo. And then I did this blind thing, and I thought, can I do that as a blind person? At the time, I thought, no. I bet today I could figure that out, right? But then some people say I work with the legislature, so maybe it's similar, I don't know. But anyway, maybe it's fine. So that was, so it was the circuitous route. It's not like I planned this, and I wish I could tell you guys, here's how you do your career. But I'll tell you lessons learned in a little bit. But I started at BYU. I did some teaching for a little bit, we had our first son, Tanner, stayed home from him, and in the meantime, I was asked to run, it's called National Federation of the Blind. I became the president of the National Federation of the Blind for Utah. It was a volunteer job, right? But I got active. I got very engaged in some advocacy work and working with parents and kids in the local agency. And in that advocacy, the national organization back in DC asked me to come back and run their governmental affairs office in DC. And so again, me being totally unqualified for that position, my husband and I said, let's do it. We're young. We had just one child, let's do it. And I think one lesson learned out of that for me, for you guys to think about, is take advantage of opportunities. You just never know where they're going to take it. You just don't sit back and wait for them to happen to you. Go out and make them happen. And I'll talk about that at the end. But just taking advantage of that one opportunity was a game changer for my career. So, you know, volunteering in a nonprofit brings me back to DC. Go back to do their governmental affairs. I remember my first week there, my boss at the time, James Gashel, neat guy, super smart, but he was so hard-nosed. And I remember the first week he's like, we were working on a Medicare bill and I needed to go back. We were in Baltimore and the office was in Baltimore. I had to take the train to go to DC and work on this bill. And he's like, go do that. And I didn't even know how to get off the train. I didn't know the buildings. I had no idea what I was doing. And, but what I learned through that is if you just try it and you give yourself the opportunity to learn and not believe you have to have it perfectly figured out or you have all the answers, but you just try it, you'll figure it out. I mean, really, you guys are a group of smart people. You'll figure it out. So I did governmental affairs in DC for a while, and that was great. In that, I met some people in the Bush administration. President Bush was president at the time, and he asked me to go to the Department of Education as a presidential appointee. I worked on some stuff over there. And then Congressman Ehrlich, who I'd met back in DC. So you can see how it just all happens, right? Just because you make one choice. I had met him. He ran for governor in Maryland and asked me to come serve on his cabinet, which I did. Governor Ehrlich was the first Republican governor in Maryland in like 30-something years. Does anyone know Michael Steele? He was the lieutenant governor for Governor Ehrlich at the time. He became chair of the Republican National Committee. So when he stepped down, Governor Ehrlich asked me to run as his LG candidate for his second term. And we lost, so apparently I was not a good pick for lieutenant governor. It was a tough race. But I'll tell you, and I'm not a big politician. Like, I like operations, I like budget, I like numbers, I like the policy part of it. I like in the weeds. I don't like all the fundraising events and handshaking stuff. That's not my thing. But it was a great experience because it really opened my eyes into a couple things. One, sometimes you've just got to have thick skin. Not just in jobs that are political, but any job you go into, you've got to be able to kind of be focused on what the end game is, not get offended, not get distracted by petty things, stay focused really on the end game and what it's about, and try to do it with integrity, know what you're doing, you believe in it, it's important for you, but not to get distracted by all those side conversations that can happen in any workplace, but heightened in a political campaign for sure. So we lost, and Governor Huntsman was the governor at the time, and he had some ties to Maryland, and he'd been watching the race, and he asked me to come back and serve on his cabinet, which I did, and then he did his thing to run for president, and Governor Herbert took his job and then asked me to come up to run the governor's office management budget. So that's my experience, has nothing to do with educational psychology, right? So how did that happen? You guys tell me, how did that happen? I still wanted to be a forest ranger. I still do, but it's not working out for me. So that career path, I think about that a lot because I love my job. I feel really lucky to be in the position I'm in right now. It happened, I think, because of a few things. I just want to talk about 4 kind of lessons learned and then how that may relate to some of your careers. You all have different, I guess, degrees that you're thinking about. And your degrees will vary. But what won't vary is, I think, 4 principles that can make a big difference in the workplace, or at least people I'm hiring, the kind of candidates I'm looking for at work. And we interview a lot of people looking for some jobs. And you'd think with all the candidates coming through our door, we could find a lot. And sometimes it's hard to find really good people. So there's the technical skills, right? So if I'm going to hire someone, I need to know they have the technical skills. They can write, they can do critical analysis, they can, if we're hiring economists, they know how to run the queries and they're comfortable with the data. There's that technical side that, somebody said English major. I need good writers. I mean, don't undermine what a great skill that is. People who don't, how to use semicolons, things like that. So you have to have great technical competence for sure. But there's this other side to people I look for that's tricky. And here's what I look for. And I'm going to tell some personal stories and tie it to that. But one is this idea of being a great problem solver. Do you ever find in life that most people can point out pretty quickly the problems with something? Like everyone's really good at griping and moaning. Would you agree with that? We are always normally pretty good at pointing out what's wrong. And that's good. You don't want to have the ostrich syndrome and put your head in the sand. If you got problems at work or revenue, whatever, you need people who point it out. But do you think it's true that then those same people are also very good at solving the problem? What do you think? No, we're very good at complaining, not as good as solving. What's really important for me at the workplace is people who can identify a problem, clearly identify the problem. I wish we had more time, we could talk about root cause, that we want to treat root causes versus symptoms in our organizations, which happens too frequently. But if they can clearly identify logically the core problem that's driving the negative consequences that are happening, but then they come up with a solution. I like staff and my employees and my team who are empowered to come up with really great ideas, even if they're not always perfect. Maybe they're half-baked and they need to work through it, but they're willing to come forward with some attempt to solve the problem. And that is such a critical asset. And Kelly was at this thing I spoke at Sunday night, and I'm going to repeat one of these stories, but this idea of being a creative problem solver is not always intuitive for people. And sometimes we'll go into problems and we'll talk about every reason why it can't be solved. And there's this great little story that I think exemplifies the nature of good problem solving. There's this little boy named Tony. He was 7. He was blind. And a friend of mine, Dr. Schroeder, was working with Tony at his school. And Dr. Schroeder is just really brilliant. He's blind himself, has super high expectations for blind people. And Tony wanted to play tag. And he went to Dr. Schroeder and said, hey, I want to play tag. How am I going to do this as a blind kid? And Dr. Schroeder went home and really came to the unfortunate conclusion that Tony this time was going to have to sit it out, that there are some things in life that this blind kid can't do. He went to school the next day to tell Tony this, but fortunately, but for the grace of God, Tony spoke first and said, Dr. Schroeder, I figured it out. He'd taken little jars of rocks, little jars, and put pebbles in them so he could hear them, and gave them to his friends, and then just mapped out kind of a flat, safe area. And as long as the little boys wouldn't cheat and put the jar down, he could hear him run, and he could play tag with his friends. Super low-tech, easy solution. But what that tells us is that we as adults get very trained on what's impossible. Tony reminds us that most things are possible if we use really good problem solving. What he did is not ask if it can happen, but he asked how it could happen. There's actually some really great structured tools out there, anything from change matrix clouds, which is one of my favorite tools, and other things to help really think about new solutions to problems that seem insurmountable. That kind of mindset and mentality is just priceless in an organization that's dealing with major issues. Any organization, if it's my office or Goldman Sachs or a private sector company or oil refinery, they've got big challenges and they need people that can come to the table with great solutions. There's a great story about this. Google had a contest a few years ago, and they put out a challenge to say, hey, if you guys can, a team, whatever team, we're going to give a reward who can solve a major world problem. But here's the constraint, you have $25. Doesn't that seem staggering? Go solve a major world problem, but you have $25. The team that won this built a bicycle, and on the back of the bike they had built a filtration system that was activated when somebody was pedaling. So as somebody from the village in Africa where they had malaria and big issues with dirty water, they would get on their bike to the well, fill up the water filtration system, bike back. By the time they got back, their water was clean. Right? Super cool solution for 25 bucks. That's the kind of mindset I need. It's the kind of mindset I think a lot of our businesses need. And Utah's doing great, and I know not all of you are from Utah, but we're doing great here, and we want to stay on top of our game. And we need that kind of people. So we need people with just great problem-solving abilities, taking advantage of opportunities. I talked about that earlier. If there's one lesson I've learned is that. I'll tell you, each step along my career, I had no idea what I was doing for the first 6 months, just to be completely candid. Taking over, coming back to Utah and taking over the Department of Workforce Services. It's, $2 billion agency, over 100 different programs. No idea what I was doing. Does that seem crazy to you? Does it give you more confidence in your government? So it's really a matter for you guys of not saying I can't do it, but that you'll figure it out. Another just really important life lesson, and Kelly heard this again the other night. when I went back to Maryland, I was losing a lot of vision. Dr. Lyon knew me when I still had more, and I kind of lost more as years went on. Finally, I was just really struggling, and I went to a residential program for blind people. It was about a 4-month residential program. You wear sleep shades, and to graduate, you have to do crazy things. You have to build furniture with power saws and all this stuff. And one of the things you have to do to graduate, I know, isn't that ridiculous? Yeah, it's true. I still have all fingers, notice. But you have to get in a van, and they put a sleep shade on you, and they drive you around. I was in Baltimore at the time. They drop you off. You have to get back to where you started, and you could only ask one question to get back. And you did have a Braille compass. So this crazy, I was like, when I first started this, I'm like, you guys are crazy. But it ended up being very, very doable. My biggest concern in Baltimore, there's like this heroin district. My biggest fear is I wouldn't end up in the heroin district in Baltimore. But you had to get back to where you started. So I was training for this at this park, and this park where I was training and trying to get ready for this graduation thing, I couldn't figure out how to get out of this park. And my professor at the time came up from behind, because I finally just stopped. I couldn't figure out how to get out. And I'm sure many of you guys, you're in your career, you're not sure what to do next. What do I study? What do I not study? Do I get a graduate degree? Do I get a law school? What do I do? What do I do? And sometimes we just get stuck with fear because we don't know what to do next. My teacher, and that's what I did, I just stopped. My teacher came up behind me and said, Kristen, you've got to learn to walk through your confusion and your fear. You're not going to get any more information by standing still. You've got to take a step into the unknown. And it's that step into the unknown, it's where you'll get the new information you need to become even better. And that's so true for careers, right? You're going to have opportunities just to take on new cool stuff. But you've got to take risks. You've got to be willing to try stuff you don't know and not hold back and just go for it and give it your all, 100%. When you go into your new job and you give it your all and you perform really, really well, opportunities will open up. I just believe that. I watch my staff now, and I have a couple guys who have just so stepped up. I mean, I have all really good people, but 2 in particular have so stepped up their game, going above and beyond, performing outside of expectations, that guess where they are now? Raises and in leadership. They just stand out. So how are you guys going to stand out? That's really, really big. And then the final thing that kind of dovetails about this is this idea of thinking big. When you go into your careers, again, companies need big solutions to big ideas. Has anyone here read The Goal? No one? You all need to read it. Dr. Ellie Goldratt, brilliant man. He was a physicist by training. Unfortunately, he died about 2 years ago. And he took his very scientific mind of training in the world of science and started to apply it to social science and business. This book, The Goal, is one of many, but it's pretty big in the business community. And he would consult businesses. And he talked to this one business, and this business was an international, it was a global company. They had a goal to make $1 billion in their fiscal year. They're in the year, they're not close to their goal. They come back to Dr. Goldratt and they say, what do? We want to achieve $1 billion in profitability. We're not even close. What does Dr. Goldratt tell them? What would you normally say? You've got a big goal, you're going to achieve it for your business, for your company, your nonprofit, your organization, your government entity. You got a big goal, you're not even close to achieving it. What do most people do?
You set smaller goals first to get to the bigger goal.
That's what most people do. Guess what Dr. Goldratt says? Double your target. Go to 2 billion. Why would he do that? Because he wasn't crazy. That's what I first said. He did it because he wanted the people to think outside the white noise. If I had 2 sets of managers, and to this group of managers I say, I want you to improve your performance by 5%, which, by the way, is within white noise variation. This group I say, I want you to improve by 50%. Do you think the conversations are going to be different? Yeah, they're going to be very different about how you think about your business, your strategy, what's possible, what's not possible. Businesses and organizations need that kind of thinking. They need, and I hate the term out of the box because everyone uses it, but seriously, ambitious, bold thinking. Not naive, not like we're going to put it out there and not figure out how to do it, but bold thinking with practical solutions to problems. So those are the lessons I learned, and I watch it in my own staff as we hire new people. They want upward mobility, they want career opportunities, and if they're bold thinkers, if they can solve problems, if they give it all they got, if they took advantages of opportunities, If they went above and beyond, those are the people, the men and women who stand out. And they're the ones who have the opportunities to continue to perform. Plus, there's a lot of luck. So that was kind of my lessons learned, what I did, and kind of what I do now. But do you guys have any questions? Don't you want to know about politics or like weird things going on in government? Yeah. Ask a question.
When the bills are proposed to the governor and you and your team are advising the governor, do you guys collect any public input for that part of it? And how do you do that?
So he had a great question. When we're looking at bills, do we take into consideration the public? And the governor, absolutely, he's very sensitive. So every week, even outside of legislative session, we review all the constituent services office, all of the letters who have come in, emails, calls. And you guys would be surprised of how few calls come in. Some, you can tell when they're organized because there'll be like a form letter. Those just don't have the impact because you're like, okay, that was just form generated. But you would think that on big issues, everybody's like writing us or calling us. Like a big week would be like, on an issue would be 300. You know, it's kind of sad to me that people, I know people are busy. I mean, I really get that. But your guys' ability, sometimes people undermine their own capacity to impact government. I happen to think that grassroots advocacy can make a real difference. So you reaching out or speaking out or calling your governor, calling your representative, your senator, most people don't, and they think somebody else is handling it for them. Somebody else is worrying about it, so they don't ever do it. But call, reach out. So we do that, and then if it's a bill, we'll bring stakeholders in from all perspectives. You know, there was a bill on education last year that we were going to veto. We brought in the education people, the legislators, heard both sides so the governor could have an informed decision.
Yeah.
So absolutely. Yep. Any other questions?
I've got a quick question.
Yeah.
What about the autism bill that failed?
On the insurance bill?
It was for, you would get an aid. It would, like, the state would help provide an aid for autistic children.
So there was actually a bill that did pass, and one is, there was a pilot program for state government. I'm trying to remember the bill. But it passed, and there's a pilot program for state employees on autism, and that's still in effect. And then part of the other, there was another bill, and that did pass by Dr. Shivazawa. He's a doctor from Cottonwood Heights, and he sponsored the bill, now that I'm recalling. And that was to require insurance companies to provide services for autism. To get that through, though, he had to put a cap. I'm trying to remember the details. He had to put a cap on the amount that they would actually have to offer. So there's some kind of cap about that I can't remember.
Yeah,
but that did pass.
It was like 20% of what he originally wanted.
Yeah.
So he didn't feel like it really made the impact. Had the
Yeah.
impact factor that he had really originally.
Yeah. So do you have someone in your family with autism?
Yeah, my
Yeah.
brother does. And then
Yeah.
Peter, his son, is my neighbor.
Yeah.
So we worked on that bill together.
That is great. It was. I mean, but I'll tell you why that is important. Autism was just off the radar screen for people for many, many years, right? It is front and center on people's radar screen, both in the Social Services Committee, in the governor's office. I mean, it's on the radar screen for sure. So because we have a prevalence of autism in Utah, I think whatever you've done, that advocacy has actually made a difference, and I think it will continue to make a difference. But it always comes down to money, right? So there was a fiscal note attached to Shizawa's bill, and I'm thinking like $3 million, but I could be wrong. And at the end of the day, they're going to take all the bills with fiscal notes. So they're going to have bills that are just standing bills with no fiscal impact. And at the end of the session, they track all these bills with fiscal notes. And they don't normally pass those towards the end of session, and they'll prioritize the bills with fiscal notes based off revenue, and then they cut it off when the money's gone, the money's gone. And there's a lot of competing bills with those fiscal notes. So it was actually an end of session thing that was happening that Shizawa even got that through. So it's not perfect, but there was, whatever you did, it actually really got on people's radar screen.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Have other states looked at Utah's model for management and budget and decided to use that system, and has Utah's system been influenced by other states?
So his question, is this Matt?
Yes.
Okay, so Matt asked, has other states looked at Utah, our model of operations and budget? The answer is yes. We just had our first Utah operations conference, and we had states come from other states. I've been invited to New Mexico and Texas and Florida and other places to speak on what we're doing and how we're doing it. It's a different mindset. People are very policy driven in government, which is important, right? Policy is important, but policy is what you do. Operations is how you do it. It's how do you affect the change. And we have a lot of great policy making going on in government. I won't even go there, but you could take a lot of examples where you've got a concept, a policy, but the execution of it's really weak. So I think that, I think there's more awareness going on, and we're not perfect. Oh my gosh, we've been into this a year, so we still have a long ways to go, but we are getting interest. And we've got, Utah, most states are really still in furloughs. Nevada still has furloughs, right? They still have employees who are on furloughs. Maryland has a $120 million Medicaid deficit. They're going to have to borrow from the rainy day fund. Utah, to have a surplus and to have the revenue growth and job growth we have in Utah is one of the top few states in the country, actually. So we're pretty lucky. And that's because we have a very conservative management structure. From the legislature, the culture, the governor all supports that. Okay, any more questions? Yeah.
Immigration has been something that's been on the minds of, especially in Utah with the Utah Compact and everything. How has the legislation about immigration affected your office?
So that was really a big deal, not last year, but probably even the year before that. There was a bill around kind of the guest worker visa program. And it was kind of creating Utah's own version of immigration where people could, one, get checked by police officers, and then there's also actually Utah's own version of a guest worker visa program. The implementation of that bill has still been delayed multiple times on the guest worker piece for a couple of reasons. One, there's a fiscal note attached to it, right? So they put the bill in place, but they didn't fund it, right? So the fiscal note didn't get prioritized, so that bill couldn't go to effect. But the other reason is they keep waiting for congressional action. So they keep waiting, well, we'll do the guest worker visa program, but if that happens, and then Congress makes a change. It'll be interesting this year because immigration was kind of on the radar screen, I think, in Congress last year. It's fallen off the radar screen, I think, a little bit. We'll see with the elections after November what happens. I think Obama's going to have a tough time, especially with terrorism and all that stuff going on. The borders are going to probably get tighter. It'll be a harder issue to push. So there was a bill passed. It was the hot topic 2 years ago, and last year it was just absent on the Hill. Okay. Well, you guys, thanks so much. It's fun being back to BYU, and thanks to my son Riley for coming to speak with me. And if you have any questions after it all, feel free to come up and ask. Okay? Thank you.